from my fellow panelists is this is an interesting site to look at. So it's encouraging all the other sites we have.
Above beyond the 4Ds, what the media does mainstream media does tend to cover are forms of activism and direct action, things like blockades. And what I find is that it usually tends to whitewash these things and really paint a lot of our communities in this like negative light as perpetrators or troublemakers. And I don't really have a lot of hope that companies like CBC are willing to make these changes because they are so directly affiliated with the Canadian government. So do you feel that it's possible, because there would have to be like a change within this institution, not just with the journalists who want to work with First Nations communities, but a change within the institution in order for there to actually be like truthful representations of what's actually happening, especially with things like land struggle issues, which are very important and happening a lot and not getting the appropriate coverage that they need.
So I think that was directed at me. Two things. I actually adapted when in the guide, the online guide, I adapted the 4D rule. I now call it the WD4 rule because I added a W to the elders' wisdom, and the W is for warrior. That's the other way that an Indian can get in the news if they become a warrior. So I totally agree with you on that. I would quibble though. I don't think it's the fact that the CBC is an arm of, is connected to the government that is the issue there. That's not the reason why there's so much coverage of direct action per se, or blockades or that kind of thing. Because the CBC is arm's length from the government, and in my experience, there isn't, you know, Stephen Harper isn't going like this, puppet strings with the CBC. We are pretty independent. Well, we are very independent from the government. But the focus on direct action and blockades and marches and things like that, which continues to be, I mean, that's why this guy, you know, a fellow that he works for is always in the news, Stuart Phillip, is because the newsrooms themselves, that's their vision of what makes news, conflict. And the, you know, I struggle with that because we know that all great stories have tension in them, right? I mean, The Lord of the Rings wasn't going to be a very interesting story if Frodo just put the ring in FedEx and said, you know, it's there overnight, right? There's got to be some element of tension in a story to make it interesting. And so, you know, that goes for journalism as well. The problem with journalism is that because a news or radio story is a minute 30, a minute 15, because front page story is about 500, 600 words, tension gets boiled down into he said, she said, or he said, or, you know, bing, like this, and you butt two voices against each other, and it becomes conflict. And that's become hardwired into newsrooms. And so it's part of newsroom culture, this hunting for conflict, and that's the way they see Aboriginal people. So, to answer your question, what folks like the Tyee are doing, which is solutions-based journalism, that's what the Tyee is all about. Let's find stories of struggle and drama and solutions, not just the problems. Let's not, you know, fall asleep after the 24-hour news cycle ends, but follow something into those complicated solutions.
Well, I'm not even talking so much about solutions, but more about an accurate representation of what these struggles are and what a lot of these communities are fighting for. And a lot of times, what they're fighting for gets completely glazed over, or isn't discussed, or makes it seem like they're fighting for nothing, that they're just trying to cause a lot of problems. And then I think the problem with that is it gets to the mainstream community and people who are already racist, or just like those crazy asshole Indians all over again, creating another blockade or whatever. And so, but, so that's just, I guess my problem is that I feel like I don't really see that change happening, I guess. And I'm asking you, like, do you see CBC eventually creating accurate representations and telling the truth of these struggles and these stories eventually at some point of what a lot of these protests and these blockades.
So let me read it. CBC has unfortunately I was at Stanford last year. I was asked to participate in this, but I was at Stanford for a year, so I couldn't participate. But it's a series called The Eighth Fire, which is coming out in January. And the senior producer for The Eighth Fire, it's a 4-hour doc series on the history of the relationship between non-Aboriginal people and Aboriginal people in Canada. You can look for it January 12th, I think. I'm not selling it or anything. But, and so Kelly Crichton is the senior producer on that. She asked me to participate. I couldn't. But I was amazed by her note. This is a woman who has an incredible resume. She, Canada, People's History, China Rising. You know, this is a senior. She produced the National, executive produced the National for years. A year ago, she started on a journey trying to do this 4-hour doc on what Canada's relationship with Aboriginal people was going to look like. This is the note that she wrote on their website about 2 weeks ago to announce the series. I'll give it to you straight. Eighth Fire, CBC TV's 4-part series on how to create a new relationship with Canada's Aboriginal peoples, is the most challenging series I've worked on in 40-some years as a practicing journalist. It's also, to me, the most humbling and most exhilarating. It's challenging because after 500 years of colonialism, conflict, and denial, it takes you right into the heart of what each of us and Canada is all about. A nation of white settlers, bracket, yes, I know we're all multi-hued now, but those first arrivals were whiteys, end bracket, who stretched ourselves out across a vast land. That, oops, actually belonged to someone else. My jaw dropped when I read that. This is a older white lady who, you know, lives in a nice, respectable neighborhood in Toronto. What she experienced in the course of a year, this change that she went through, that because she spent some time, because she was asked to explore that question, I think that can happen. I think it can happen with all journalists. I have lots of hope. We've got to wait for some of the older journalists to move on. Yeah. But
or
they
you
are
can
going to
switch to community and campus radio.
Exactly. They can do that too and get the alternative story.
Don, do you have something to add?
It's getting more sophisticated. A lot more communities, a lot more First Nations are taking the time to draft their own press releases, to distribute those press releases. Some are becoming more so. They're hiring PR firms to you know, reach out and make that bridge to those journalists, to come to those communities, to listen and to hear. But it's really up to us, you know, to frame the question. Conflict only happens because, you know, negotiations and litigation fail. You know, it is the last resort. We are defending our territory. We are not being assholes when we defend our territory. We're doing it for our children and our grandchildren, and that's what's key to this. You know, those people that think that way, unfortunately, are not the ones that you're targeting. You'll never convince them otherwise. What you will convince is those that want to be, you know, take the time and increasingly they are the ones that are coming up. They're younger, they're, you know, more exposed, and the internet is one tool in which we can communicate that message.
Okay, you've reached the end of Indigenous Choices, Indigenous Voices, Aboriginal Uses in Media. Thank you for joining.